All right, so here we are, the highly anticipated release from Heaven Hill, the Elijah Craig Barrel Proof Batch A125. We're going to talk a little bit today about that and see exactly how this one maybe stacks up versus some of the prior releases. That's always the main thing we look for in the Elijah Craig Barrel Proof. We're going to talk about that today on the My Bourbon Journey Whiskey Review channel. All right, guys, welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for joining me today. I greatly appreciate it. So I'm always excited, and I think the vast majority of us are always excited for the next release of the Elijah Craig Barrel Proof. Now we're into 2025 and batch A125 of the ECBP from Heaven Hill Distillery. And this is going to be kind of interesting. So knowing and seeing some of the specs, we'll kind of dive into that stuff here in a second. But again, we'll see exactly how this one's going to kind of stack up. I may not do a comparison directly, but just kind of knowing exactly kind of some of the profiles that the Elijah Craig Barrel Proofs have had in the past. We'll see exactly where this one kind of shakes out. And really, you want to try to treat these, individually as much as you can, so that you, when you're doing the selection or deciding whether or not this is a bottle you want to purchase, you want to know exactly what kind of the profile of this one's going to be. Some of the others we've had in the past have been great and all of that, but let's kind of talk a little bit about some of the specs for the ECBP Batch A125. All right, so some of the specs on this. So this one's coming in at 118.2 proof. So one of the lower proofed ECBPs that we've had in quite some time. It is age stated as 10 years, 7 months, which I think either ties or is slightly younger than the B521, if I'm not mistaken. Mash bill, typical of Heaven Hill, 78% corn, 10% rye, 12% malted barley, and again, a pretty friendly MSRP of about $75. So again, I think I'll say this as a blanket statement. I think these are always going to be a buy. Again, they are going to vary based on ages and proofs and all of that, but that's what we're going to kind of dive into today. So rather than waste any more time, let's go ahead and kind of dive into it. So as you can see, color-wise, I'm going to say this is maybe a medium to lightish kind of copper, not one of their darker releases, that's for sure. But again, I'm moving the whiskey around in the glass. Again, it's all non-chill filtered as normal, but decent legs, I'll say that. So let's go ahead and see how this one's going to nose. So let me talk to you about ZBiotics Pre-Alcohol Probiotic, why I use it, why I love it, why it's been an absolute game changer for me, and why I think it can be for you as well. The answer to why is simple. For me, it works. How easy is it to take? Simple. Open up the box that they send you, pull out one of the little bottles, give it a quick little shake, and down the hatch. It's as simple as that. And let the ZBiotics take over from there. So when do I use ZBiotics? Typically, I use it prior to doing any barrel picks, or if I'm going to be heading out for an evening and I know I'm going to be consuming a few alcoholic beverages. This is an easy solution. I know I'm going to feel my best and really allow me to be productive the following day. Now, a little bit more about ZBiotics. ZBiotics Pre-Alcohol Probiotic Drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to help tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for the rough next day. ZBiotics Pre-Alcohol Probiotic produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. And just remember to make ZBiotics your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly, stay properly hydrated, and you'll feel your best the following day. Now the question, how do you get it? Simple. Check out the link in the description below or use code BourbonJourney15 at checkout and save 15% off your first order. And again, make sure you check out the link in the description below for 15% off your first order. And remember, if you're unsatisfied for any reason, there's a 100% money back guaranteed, no questions asked. And a big thank you to ZBiotics for sponsoring today's video. All right, so my first initial thought on this one is a slightly dry or kind of like tannic oak. I'm not getting a lot on the nose. And let me back up one step. What I did was a night or two ago, sat down with this and actually over the course of 2 or 3 hours, tried to kind of let it open up, sit, and just kind of do its thing, just to kind of not want to do it right off of a neck pour. So I wanted to get a little bit of air in the bottle to see exactly what it would do. And then I actually poured maybe about 2 ounces and left that open overnight. So I've got to, I mean, this thing's going to be about as open as it possibly can get. So we'll see exactly what this one's going to do. I like the medium kind of red fruit note that it has. Really nice baking spices. That's one of the things that definitely is coming through right away, are maybe a heavier baking spice. Almost this kind of like fresh cinnamon stick. There is this nice cinnamon note that doesn't feel like artificial at all. It does feel like a more rounded or just a nicer cinnamon note overall. So here was one of the odd things about this, and I was getting this last night or the night before, is I'm getting this odd kind of alcohol note. And I don't want to quite say it's like a rubbing alcohol, but it's coming across as this heavier alcohol note that you'll oftentimes get on a fairly young whiskey. So again, I don't know if that will change as this bottle opens up, and maybe from here going forward 30 days, I'll do like kind of a recap to see how much it changes, if at all. So we'll see maybe in 30 days how that goes. But so far it is giving me this kind of odd alcohol kind of note. And definitely some of that, typical Heaven Hill Elijah Craig nuttiness, kind of like almost a little bit of a peanut butter, like a light peanut butter note. It's not overly dominant or overly heavy on that nuttiness side of things. So that is there. It's just kind of muted, in all honesty, kind of like a lot of the other, nosing notes, in here so far. Nothing is really overly just jumping out of the glass for me. Maybe a little hint of like a leather note, something along those lines, and maybe a little bit of black pepper, but I'm not getting blown away overall by the nose so far. So, but that's only part of it. Let's see exactly what this one's going to taste like and dive into that now. Cheers. All right, so let's first address the mouthfeel. What I'll say about that is it's not overly viscous. I would honestly say it's probably more on that slightly thinner side. It doesn't feel like it's coating the palate, significantly, or, in remembering what some of the prior batches were like. I don't really remember it being that kind of mouth coating. So for this one, like off the first sip or two, kind of feels a little bit thin so far in the mouth. So as we kind of get into another sip or two, the one thing that I do really enjoy about this is the baking spice. The proof is allowing this to also feel much more approachable, like a more, I'll say, sippable Elijah Craig barrel proof. And that's because of that proof. Some of the other ones have been in that 130, 133, which is getting significant in proof. This feels much more drinkable from a proof standpoint. But again, overall, going back to just a little bit of like the mouthfeel, a little bit thin, but I do love the baking spice part of it. That is one thing that's really jumping out, which then you start to kind of fall into those maybe like red fruit notes that are there. Again, a little bit more of the cinnamon notes that are there for sure. Now, like I was getting on the nose, to kind of carry over, there is a little bit of this dryness, a little bit of leather. It's not overly dry. The oak feels like more of a dried or like a seasoned oak, something along those lines, more than those kind of like really nice rickhouse or sweet oak kind of notes. This does feel a little bit more kind of tannic, but not overly dry. A little bit of dry leathers, maybe tobacco-ish, something along those lines. Nice red fruits, like I had mentioned before. Again, a fantastic baking spice. That is one thing that this really has going for it, that's matching or working really well with that proof point. Now, as far as the nuttiness goes, again, that's there. And I feel like the more I continue to sip it, the more that's there. More dryness starts to set in, maybe more of those kind of drying leather notes or a dry oak note kind of starts to set in. The finish part of it is not overly long. The one thing that is helping this by far is the baking spice factor. That is helping the finish be maybe more of like a medium, something along those lines, you know, but overall, I think this just kind of falls into that middle of the road category for me, you know, and again, I'm using other or prior releases as that kind of benchmark. So knowing what those other profiles were before, you know, this doesn't feel quite like it's on par with some of those prior releases. So here's what I'll say about this one. I think this is a great bourbon. At the end of the day, is it worth 75 bucks? Yes, I think it's still enjoyable to drink. I mean, in terms of value, it may be still one of the better or best values for a cask strength bourbon, you know, these days. So we've got this one, 10 years, 7 months, 118.2 proof. So good from all that standpoint. It's not what we're typically used to from the ECBPs, but again, it is what it is, and it's the one thing that I appreciate about the 3 releases a year is that we get something different every time. And what I'll always say is I think they're 100% worth a buy. I would just say this one is probably for anybody who's used to that heavier, richer, darker kind of profile. This one may fall a little bit short for you on that. But again, I would never tell anybody, generally speaking, to not buy this release. Again, I think it's always a buy simply because of what it has to offer. So I'm always a huge fan of the ECBPs, and I'll always probably be a fan of them. But in terms of like where this kind of falls in, again, I think this is probably just, you know, middle of the road, you know, nothing I'm going to go crazy about or anything along those lines. But again, very enjoyable, very sippable, has a lot of those things, you know, that it has going for it. So, you know, there you go, guys. Hopefully that helps a little bit with this batch, the newest here in 2025, the A125. So most importantly, I want to hear from you. So if you've had this or are kind of anticipating it, you know, let me know in the comments below, you know, your thoughts overall on the ECBP batch A125. So kicking off the year, this just leaves us, I feel, with more anticipation as to what the B and C batches are going to give us. And again, I had referenced it before as to, you know, my overall, you know, love or enjoyment for ECBP. It is the bourbon that I use when doing barrel picks as kind of my benchmark. So that says a lot, you know, I think about the whiskey itself as to, you know, them having a whiskey that can be a benchmark for anybody to kind of work off of, you know, gauging, you know, is that the kind of whiskey you want to kind of match up to that particular whiskey. So again, I make no bones about it. It is one of my favorite pours, you know, 3 times a year for the most part. So, and again, I just want everybody to understand exactly what the A125 has to offer. And if some of that kind of sounds good to you or makes this more approachable to you, or the opposite where it's a pass for you, you know, then to each their own. But that's the idea with these is making sure that these videos or what it is that I'm trying to describe comes across to you, and hopefully you find that valuable. So thank you guys so much for tuning in today. Greatly appreciate it as always. If you'd like to follow me, you can on Instagram and Facebook. If you'd like to help support the channel and become part of the Mash and Journey Whiskey Club, make sure you check out that Patreon link in the description below. That down there with a lot of other great things for you as well, so make sure you check that out as well. So again, guys, thank you so much for tuning in, and as always, it's about the journey and not the destination. Cheers, we'll see you on the next one. One step, keeping pace, taking our time, Girl, I wouldn't trade